So know the type of business you are, and you ensure that you have that confidence to not be defeated before you've stepped off the plane. That's number one. But then number two is really do the analysis. If you're successful in the UK, is there a replicable market for you? And of course, the government will probably be able to give you some answers on that pretty quickly. If there is a replicable market, use everybody you can. Everybody you can. Use your networks and slowly build a plan. Find what you can do, write your report, do your SWOT, do it really ruthlessly. And if the answer is wrong, don't be afraid to walk away.
Welcome to the H-Files, the new series of the Hands-On Business podcast, where we dive deep into the world of healthcare leadership and the unique challenges facing small to medium-sized healthcare businesses. I'm Hakeem Adebiyi, and after years of helping businesses grow in various industries, I'm excited to focus on the area that I know the best, healthcare, one of the most dynamic and impactful sectors in the world today. In this series, we're going to explore what it takes to lead and grow in healthcare, from navigating the complexities of regulation and innovation to overcoming the everyday hurdles of building a sustainable business in this fast-paced environment. Each episode will feature real-world insights, expert interviews, and actionable strategies that can help you push your healthcare business forward. So whether you're a leader in the space or an entrepreneur ready to break into it, the H-Files is here to give you the edge. In today's fast-paced, hyper-specialized business world, standing out is no easy feat, especially in sectors like healthcare, life sciences, and technology. And these are areas where complexity and innovation reign supreme. Now, what if I told you that I know a marketing agency that may have cracked the code on actually standing out, but also on helping life science companies grow internationally? Today, I'm joined by Kath Darlington, the driving force behind the marketing group, the Scott Partnership Holdings Limited. Now, the Scott Partnership is a global B2B marketing and PR powerhouse with operations in the UK, the USA, and also Asia Pacific. And they have helped transform how life sciences and technology companies communicate, connect, and most importantly, grow. So Kath received an MBE in the 2025 New Year's Honours List for services to business growth and to international trade. And that just adds to the King's Award for Enterprise for International Trade that her business received in 2024. Kath is also an export champion, just like me, and we help local companies on their export journeys. Now, with more than 25 years, I know it's hard to believe, experience in B2B marketing, Kath started the Scott Partnership just down the road from me in Cheshire in 1996. And the group has 3 brands, all of which work in sciences, both in the UK and internationally. So Kath's journey is really, as I would see it, a masterclass in finding your niche, scaling effectively and thriving in an ever-evolving market. So what does it really take to build an agency that redefines the game internationally? Let's find out, because we're going to be discussing how PR and marketing can give you global reach in healthcare. So welcome and thank you for agreeing to come onto the show, Kath.
Thank you so much, Hakeem, for inviting me. It's brilliant to be here with you in January 2025. I always love being alongside you on a panel, and here we are now on a podcast. Looking forward to talking.
Yeah, can't wait. So I always ask the first opening question, the last closing question, to make sure that there's a consistency in the podcast, because we can sometimes go off and down rabbit holes in the main content. So the first one that I always ask is, what one piece of advice would you give to anyone trying to make a big impact in their field in healthcare?
So clearly we work with a lot of companies, both large and small. And our job is to help support them to do that. The companies that are really enlightened are the ones who realize that it's their job to do this. Many companies suffer from thinking, I've got the most perfect product here and everybody will come and find me. And they don't. Or it takes a lot of luck to be found. So really, it's about being proactive and taking your life in your own hands, setting your vision where you want to be, and then chasing it with a real focus. Yeah.
Yeah, so proactive info. Yeah, because I was just going to say there, it's amazing how many people um, have products which are great, but they never get found, and it's amazing how many successful products are not necessarily the best products if when you look at it objectively in their field.
Exactly. And, there's this huge sense that if you earn something, people will come and find you. But your role in that is to make sure that they know where to find you, really.
Yeah, no, 100%. And obviously you're an experienced marketing executive. You could have chosen any particular area to go into because marketing is not specific to any particular niche. So what inspired you to start the Scott Partnership, and how did you identify the niche that you now have in life sciences and technology?
Okay, firstly, to um, start the Scott Partnership, I would say my inspiration was naivety, optimism, youth, potentially stupidity as well at the same time. Um, no, I was working in an agency. I was fortunate to be working in an agency, and I led their PR operation. And I didn't want to move back to London. I realised that I'd reached where I could probably reach in the Northwest, and I didn't want to go south to further my career. So that naivety led me to think, well, why can't I do it myself? And because I knew what my clients needed and how to practice and deliver, it seemed like such a simple proposition. With the naivety of youth. I was under 30 at the time. I honestly believed, well, if it doesn't go well, I'll just get a job or get a job again. Now I don't have that naivety of youth. I realise I've made myself totally unemployable.
I can imagine.
Uh,
Oh, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, well, my experience up until then was always in the construction industry, and it was in the UK construction industry, which when I started was coming out of recession in the early 90s. So my experience was it was a hard business, and construction industry is always the first to go into recession. And the UK economy pretty much is cyclical, goes up and down, and construction falls off the cliff before everything else. So when I decided to set up the business, I wanted to de-risk. So I didn't want to be in the construction industry, and I didn't want to be exposed to the UK economy. So I knew I wanted to be B2B PR, and I knew that there were bigger opportunities out there. Now, the fact that I found this scientific niche was really lucky for me. We had one client in the agency I worked with that was a scientific software business. And what I found in the agency was that because everybody worked in construction, they knew the language of construction. They understood how to market doors and windows. In fact, anybody can do it because you look at a door and you know what you're going to say. It closes, it's secure, etc., etc. Whereas with scientific software, nobody in the industry understood it. But I loved it. It was a challenge. You had to understand the market. There was a new terminology. It was international. So for me, it was a personal challenge to understand the market. But then once I understood that that was the tip of the iceberg in terms of the market, it opened lots of doors because that client was international. It had US budgets, which are bigger. The international de-risked against the UK economy, which was what I was hoping to do, sort of not be so exposed to a business startup failure percentage, which we normally see. And then the language of science was great. It for us, in the way that it was for my former agency, was a barrier to entry for agencies. People look at it, they don't understand the language, they think it's a different practice entirely. And so, it means that we're less competitive in this niche. We've been in that market for 20 plus years now, and we worked with that client for 18 years and still work in scientific software, which is a global market worth billions. It's a great niche for us. We still love it.
So it's interesting that because obviously you're talking about de-risking,
Yes,
i.e. going internationally, which I think a lot of people do, and then you're talking about also protecting yourself because
yes,
once you get into healthcare and life science, firstly, healthcare and life sciences tend to grow whatever the commercial environment maybe of that country, there's still money going into those sort of areas. And then, as you said, there's fewer agencies in there because it's a more of a specialized niche as opposed to a more generic one where people know. So based on that, what if anything would you say, or are there differences between the marketing process or marketing within life sciences when you're working with life science companies as opposed to when you're working in construction or other areas?
Well, and the decision-making unit is quite complex because usually the purchase is very large. Just use that scientific software example. The decision-making is a 2-year to 4-year cycle. You've got budget holders, you've got procurement, so there's a huge decision-making unit that you need to approach. And then there needs to be a lot of long-term vision because of that time frame. So what you're doing today has to impact people in over a long period of time. However, that said, there are some commonalities. In B2B, marketing itself is more steady. So there's less turnover within marketing departments. So in the client side, there's less turnover with agencies. So, B2B is better than B2C for that. But the practices of marketing are similar, but you really have to understand the target audience much more and what you're trying to achieve and how they will work more. An example of that, just to sort of make that clear, is in science, for example. Scientists trust other scientists probably more than they trust their own employer. So, a PhD who works in the competitor is probably somebody I would respect more than the company I work for. And so we find one example is that customer voice, using scientists to talk to other scientists, really cuts through in science, which sometimes it doesn't in other markets because people are so afraid of the complexities of maybe showing some of their IP or talking about what they're doing. It's usually felt it should be confidential, and in science it's much different. So
No,
we have
yeah. Sorry, carry on.
No, I was going to say we have those opportunities. That brings us in front of, we talk to scientists who've won Nobel Prizes, and you can bring their story into the market. So it's a great way a great tool that people use for communicating their adoption of their own technologies and their own, propositions, using customer voice and key opinion leaders to talk on their behalf.
And I think that's really important in terms of the scientific aspect and
Yes.
actually key opinion leaders and thought leaders. So one of the biggest challenges I've seen in marketing in life sciences, obviously you've got the regulatory, because you're not talking about a door, but you're talking about something that could be life-saving, life-changing, etc.
Yes.
So how do you get around that? Because I know a lot of, if I look at the healthcare company I work with, a lot of those big healthcare companies are really worried about using the traditional marketing techniques because of that regulated environment.
It's really funny you say that, actually, because of course a lot of our clients are very large multinationals, and they're probably in exactly the same position. Very large legal teams, very large, sort of regulatory teams who are looking at compliance and how they can perform across multiple markets. That said, of course, there is a framework, there's a way in which you can communicate. So firstly, as long as you're very au fait with the legal situation and you work with all those collaborators, working with the compliance teams and with the legal teams, then as long as everything is approved and within the guidelines, you can go for it. Secondly, and we do find this quite a lot, if products aren't approved for a use, you can still have customers talking about them in that application, even if the vendor doesn't. So actually that brings us back straight to the user working on your behalf, because the vendor can't say this is suitable for that application because the product isn't approved for it. But if somebody is saying, well, I know it's not, but there's nothing else, and so I bought it and I'm using it, then you can demonstrate use in many different ways. It's just about bringing a bit of creativity to the rigidity of that regulation.
That's very helpful, I think, because I think that's one area where people, especially marketeers in those sorts of companies, are very nervous about. So I think it's important to actually.
And
Uh,
I agree with you. I was going to say, actually, I think not only are they nervous, they can't see a road through, and therefore many of those companies say, "Well, it's a blanket ban. You don't say
yes,
anything."
exactly.
And really, that's self-limiting. If you're spending millions of dollars creating a product and investing in R&D and sales teams, you're ignoring all the opportunities you have to talk to your prospective audience.
I, I would, however, say that the US is probably less restrictive because I remember the first time I went to the US. Oh my God, I don't even want to think about how many years ago. And they were advertising and actually mentioning competitors and I'm thinking, well, you can't do this. And they were much more open, adverts on TV, etc.
Yeah. And again, that comes down to regulation, what you were actually allowed to do, plus the different healthcare systems. But we're not allowed to do that in Europe. But in America, you can promote directly to the consumer much more than is permissible in the UK and Europe, for example.
Thank you. And one of the things, obviously, that we work with lots of export companies, and the biggest thing that every company is looking at is that they're a scale up or they're a startup and they're looking to go global. So, from your point of view, in the Scott partnership, what were your biggest challenges that you faced transitioning from a startup in 1996 to now being a global agency? And how did you overcome those challenges?
It's really funny to think back about it because you over time forget all the pain, and you also, I mean, certainly I do. You sort of sugarcoat the story. So looking back has been really interesting. Firstly, we're a small business, and there are so many more large companies, even in the UK, who are on their steps going internationally. Um, and I'd love to say to anybody who we ever engage with, it's such an opportunity for the business. So currently we are 75% export as a business. So most of our customers are located outside the UK. But to the challenge question, when we founded the business all those decades ago, we founded in the days when things like people used fax machines for communication. And you had to get on a train and go and do a meeting, and you had to drive to somebody's office and do a face-to-face meeting. So, the whole business environment was different. So our argument used to be, we don't have to be in London, and people were aghast at that, but we do have to be near Manchester Airport. And, it's like, what sort of business are you? This is not a normal business model. We were right about London. We still don't need to be in London. And it's never been important to us at all. And we were also right about Manchester Airport, but those things were luck. Us, recognizing that there was an opportunity over the horizon and beyond Manchester and beyond the borders of the UK. But it was apparent to us from the get-go, working in science, that once we'd chosen this niche, there weren't going to be the type of global business that we wanted to work with in Manchester or even in the UK in terms of the scale. So I guess you could say our ambitions would have been thwarted if we didn't go overseas. So we absolutely had to find a way of moving beyond the horizons. And our challenges, therefore, were initially structure, they were delivery, and they were expectation. Our revenues typically follow the Pareto law. The most revenues we earn are from the largest global multinationals. But you know straight away what I'm going to say. For every client based in North America or Germany or Canada or Switzerland whom we support, there's a far larger percentage of companies who are not sitting there saying, I need to appoint an agency in Cheshire in the UK. It's just not on their horizon. So we had to look at the structure to overcome that barrier straight away. And to overcome that, our first consideration was, do we need to deliver in market? And our second consideration was, if we do or if we don't, how do we communicate to people that we are in that market? So very simply, we set up an Inc. in Massachusetts. We did that in 2009, 2010. And that Inc. really exists overcome the argument, why should I work with the Scott Partnership when I can have an agency locally on my doorstep? We already can then demonstrate we're a listed company in the UK and we own an Inc in the US. So we cover both geographies and we've invested in that market. That led to that second challenge about delivery. And this is one we struggled with for a long time. Agencies struggle with it anyway. But when you're scaling up, it's really difficult. Agency models for how they run the business are pretty much like a law firm. It's all based on time and it's all based on fee earners. So you don't want to add a high cost base into that fee earner model. What we found, I mean, we looked at it for 5 or 10 years, was, if we invest in delivery in the US, which we've done several times, then the costs go up and the burden on the margin goes up. So you need to run quicker. And we always struggle with the ups and downs of that. So effectively, we decided about 9 years ago that we were going to really concentrate all delivery from the UK and therefore properly be an export business, exporting from the UK. And that enabled us to manage all our margins very clearly while delivering into market. The third challenge we had was expectation. It goes back to the 90s when you had to be in front of everybody. And of course, in those early decades, we were traveling so much just to keep customers confident in our abilities. It wasn't in the service, but it was in the trust area. We had to get on planes all the time. And of course, that has all changed since COVID. We were fortunate that we were talking about this 20 years ago. We don't need to be next to you to be able to service you. We don't really having a specialist agency who specializes in your niche is more important than having an agency round the corner who might not be able to help you at all. So in terms of expectation, we've really sort of changed that delivery model to we export services from the UK and we deliver remotely.
And what advice would you give to obviously other agencies, but also med and healthcare companies who are still stuck in that? Yes, we know that sometimes you need to press the flesh. You have to have a balance, but who are really nervous about, I can't do it from remotely. I have to be in market because, as you rightly say, that always adds a significant amount of pressure on your margins and your budgets.
It really does. Well, I mean, I'm going to pull straight back to our role as export champions, working with the British government. Both Hakeem and I are working with the Department for Business and Trade, and our role is to help British companies on that export journey. I was really shocked to discover that only 10% of UK businesses export. I mean, honestly, I can't tell you. The opportunity that provides is huge. If you go back to our sort of mechanism, it's like just the money in terms of market size, the total market opportunity is so much bigger than limited by our borders. But really there are steps. The government will support people. There are trade missions, and our methodology for expansion has been pretty much the same and replicable whichever market we go in. We first came across a program that existed with what was the UKTI then, 15 years ago, called Export Market Research Scheme. And we did those. They were effectively go into market, do your market research, write a report. The report will say yes or no and make your decisions based on what you find in market. Now, that export market research scheme, which was a 50% grant funded scheme, is no longer available, but people can still get some grants for some things. We've still followed that model, even though the funding isn't available. In terms of taking an almost academic approach to how you expand, do be in market, but instead of just looking, think of it as a real opportunity for you, a proper BD opportunity. So what I mean by that is when you're doing your research, you want to go and talk to the people who going to be asking for orders from. So don't hold back. Don't expect them to find you. Do your list of your top 20 and get your way in front of their desk, because they're the ones who are going to tell you about what the market is, how they make budget decisions, how they make buying decisions, what the competitive space is like. And we really start from that sort of information. You can do that once and you can open many doors by meeting 20 people who you'd like to work with. And then you can come back and then you can do all your desk work from there.
Yeah, and I think that's really wise advice. And this is the advice I know you give, and we always give. You need to understand the market before you start plunging into it.
Yes.
Because
yes.
you can. Well, I've got a very good friend who used to describe it as fishing where the fishes are, because you can go to any market, but they're not all the same. And if you spend, in fact, I was speaking to someone yesterday who was talking about expanding, and he was saying, well, I'm not going to go to Belgium because Belgium's like 3 countries and it's quite small. Now, to be fair, he's from the Netherlands, so the Netherlands always think that Belgium's really small. So, but he's right in a way, because if you're going to pick a country where you know that if you're successful, there's volume of work to be actually derived from that market, rather than saying, oh well, I've got lots of friends over there, so I'm going to go there, and then there's not really any great opportunity for you to grow a business in that market. So I think that's a really important point.
Also know your business, know what you want to be. Do you want one good client? Do you want to grow around one good client? In which case you're maybe in a particular geographic cluster or something like that. Or do you want to take on a whole market? Because those approaches will influence the choices you make. We always really firmly believe in doing the cost analysis before we do anything, because that really influences, can I afford to do this or that or the other? How many years am I going to make a loss if I enter this market? Can I take a step-by-step approach? And we really try and model that the type of business we are, we like to be profitable and we like to make money. So we normally start with let's not make a loss. Let's not invest for 3 years on the off chance that in 4 years' time that market is there for us. So we're very clear once we've done that report. If there's a big opportunity, you really find it by clustering around the opportunities you have in building, and then going back to the government and Department for Business and Trade and asking for their help, because they will help you.
It's an interesting point, actually, because as you said, we were when we heard the stat about 10%. I think we were both quite surprised of UK companies that only export, because obviously we do a lot of it, so we enjoy it. So it's not just about it de-risk and it makes money, but actually it's quite enjoyable going, engaging in business in other languages, in other locations, and you learn so much. So it's always a shock when I hear that statistic. And I think making sure that you actually do your research so that it's profitable, because obviously if you go into a market and it's not profitable, then it's going to prevent you or make you scared about going into other markets. So doing the research is important. I think, as you've just outlined, there's ways to do that without having to sink loads of money into a market. Do your research, your understanding, by going to that market, and then you make a decision on, well, what's the best way to approach that market. So
that's very true. I was going to say, I think the other thing, just flipping that 10% statistic that I think about quite frequently now, is what a different country the UK would be if another 10% was doing that. Can you imagine the economic power that would bring to the UK? So in a way, the confidence that we get and the kick that we get from doing it, I think should be infectious if people understand that it's enjoyable to work overseas, and it's rewarding to work overseas, and you can grow your business by working overseas. But equally, the UK economy can grow by you doing that. So it's win-win-win, isn't it?
No, it certainly is, and it certainly should be, and hopefully we can play a small part in driving that other 10% in the next few years, we hope. And then, I mean, from your point of view, and obviously you're in the PR space, to be in marketing. So, is there anything that you've seen that's specifically changed over that time in the B2B space specifically, that and we talked a bit earlier about obviously transportation and telecommunication, but is there anything outside of that you'd say, yeah, this has really been a shift in what we do?
I mean, absolutely. Uh, I mean, it's like sort of looking at 100 years when you look at the difference between 1996 and now. And in those days, everybody work was slower, business was slower. Uh, we worked in print media, and that's a totally different space now.
Mm.
The adoption of digital strategies has radically changed the delivery channels for marketing. But, and this is for me the sort of parallel. People forget that channels change all the time. I just look at it and go, well, it used to be fax and now it's email, or now it's, LinkedIn, or it's Twitter, or it's Instagram. Nothing's constant. Everything's changing, but everything also stays the same. So really, it's just the channels that change. And if you think about that, it's still people and businesses buying services and products. And really, it's just the channels to reach them that have changed. Then obviously those channels are now digital. That just makes it faster and puts more imperative on people to be in charge of their own destiny rather than waiting for somebody to knock on the door.
Yeah, no, I think that's certainly when I look at, and I do marketing, I don't do PR as much, but certainly from a marketing point of view, the principles are still robust. The principles are still exactly the same. You can just do them. I can do a mailer today without leaving my house, as opposed to the old days. You had to, send mailers out. You had to then, mark them up to make sure you know where they've gone, and you try to get information back. It's a lot harder than it is nowadays, where digital gives you almost information about your demographic, your customer base, at the touch of a button, which is brilliant as a marketer.
Exactly. I mean, we're going from being blind to being able to see. So, that's always beneficial, isn't it? You can then replicate that. So it's great. It's great. And having a constant desire to learn more, which I think, you're never doing the same thing. So you're always learning a new skill and you're always learning a new channel. So that makes it feel youthful still, even though I'm an old woman.
You're not.
But you
So,
know what I mean.
no, I know.
It's a great challenge, learning all the time and moving all the time, and it's fantastic.
No, it is great, and try to keep up with my kids is always difficult. But it's
Yeah, yeah.
because I'm always trying to stay one step ahead, which I know is going to end sooner or later. But the new technology that comes out, the AI that comes out, the things that you can get involved with, that actually can really drive your business. And you and I both know that one of the key pillars of our industrial strategy is that digital. Digital health is in there, but there's digital products. And I'm going to Arab Health in a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, and in the GCC countries as well. They're really looking at how digital can change their healthcare and change their business model. So it's a very exciting time. So
improve people's health and succeed internationally all together at the same time. I think that's great.
No, I completely agree. And then if you had any advice to give to an entrepreneur at the moment who's watching this and they're in the PR and marketing space, and they are one of that 90% that don't export and they're starting up, what advice would you give them to say, well, these are maybe the couple of steps you need to take to scale your agency in the competitive marketplace?
So, firstly, I think it's really useful to know yourself and to know your business. Sometimes it can be a lonely journey if you're out on your own in the field, and I think people have to know, are they fearless enough and resilient enough to do that? In our business, we actually have a sort of part of our recruitment strategy is bringing linguists in as one of our recruitment channels, because we believe that people who are linguists have that fearlessness, and that sort of then builds into the business. So know the type of business you are, and you ensure that you have that confidence to not be defeated before you've stepped off the plane. That's number one. But then number two is really do the analysis. If you're successful in the UK, Is there a replicable market for you? And of course, the government will probably be able to give you some answers on that pretty quickly. If there is a replicable market, use everybody you can. Everybody you can. Use your networks and slowly build a plan. Find what you can do. Write your report. Do your SWOT. Do it really ruthlessly. And if the answer is wrong, don't be afraid to walk away. I think the biggest mistakes we've always made are, just keeping that enthusiasm and go, it's going to work, it's going to work. And I'll give you some examples. You mentioned we've got North American footprint and Asia Pacific footprint. I spent a lot of time looking at the market in India. Should we expand into India? We have clients in India. We work with a lot of our clients in that market. And having spent maybe 6 months and been in and out of the market to look at it, the answer for us was we're not going to make money. It's too competitive in our space, and people won't pay the level that we want. We can make more money traveling to America than we can traveling to India for our particular services. So really look at the market and look at yourself, and don't try and kid yourself because it's so big or there's so many people or the opportunity is so huge. Pull back if it's not going to work for your business and just focus on the things that are going to work.
I think that's really important actually, because many a business has been lost because they won't stop at the right point and they keep going and they keep going, and then they realize actually we spent so much money we can't actually afford to keep going anymore.
This is really true. And I mean, some companies, financial models are different. So some companies are highly geared and they're wanting to expand and they're wanting to acquire, and of course, one of the steps you can do is acquiring in another country in order to gain a footprint. But you have to know, am I good at acquisition? Am I good at managing that integration? Am I good at doing the cultural fit? We acquired 2 businesses in 2011, and having done that, I will never do that again. And I was in a round table in Manchester in December, hosted by an M&A expert, a nice guy called Constantine Biller at Shaw & Co. And he said, "Do you know, M&A is probably one of the riskiest things any business can do. Don't do it unless you have all the answers." And it's that with export. It's the same thing. If you're confident that your business has the skill set to do this in this way, do it. If you're not, get help. Get other people around you to help you. Do what other people do, because actually, this in many ways, that tried and tested step is tried and tested because it succeeds.
And I can't believe it, and I say this every time I do a podcast, we're come to the end of our time together. I
That
want to
went
just ask.
quickly.
I know it always does, you see, because I just start having conversation with people
Yeah.
and they give me all of their good stuff, and then I think, oh, whoops, run out of time. So I always ask before we go, if you could leave our listeners, because I expect everyone will listen to the whole thing, but just in case someone fast forwards, if you could
Yes.
leave our listeners with one practical piece of advice on leading a business, specifically with clear values and vision, because you've talked a lot about that actually.
Yes.
What would that advice be?
On leading them internationally or just on building their profile?
I think a bit of both. So let's have a 2-for-1. So you can give me a bit about the business internationally and then just about building the profile.
So I think in terms of building a business internationally, you have to have the skill set within the organization to help you expand. I guess it goes back to what Constantine was saying last month about acquisitions. If you don't have the right people to manage it, then you're going to be destined for failure. And that means, for example, it can't just be one person, because you can't have somebody running the home office and the overseas office and succeed in both unless you have all of that infrastructure in place. So I think really thinking through who can do what does help. And then in terms of, helping a company to expand in general with their visions and values, it's really about write the plan and then achieve it. Manifestation. You know what you want to do, Don't hold back. And I think many companies know what they want to do, but they don't take the first step. So definitely take that first step, use people who are skilled at helping you, and go for it.
Thank you very much, Kath. That's been an absolute pleasure. It's gone in a blink of an eye, but I really appreciate it. And I always say to people that, because as soon as I put the podcast out, people start asking even additional questions, and I say, well, I want to get the person back on. So I'm sure that we will have you back on at some point in the future. But for today, thank you, Kath Darlington. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Hakeem. It was lovely to speak with you as ever.
Thank you very much. So great to have Kath Darlington on the show today. Kath is probably one of my most awarded guests I've had on from the UK, because she was a New Year's Honours winner for services to business growth and to international trade. And she also won the King's Award for Enterprise for International Trade. And like me, she's an export champion for the Department of Business and Trade for the UK government. So probably one of those guests, like all my guests, that you really want to listen to their advice. So there was lots of things that Kath talked about, and obviously I'm going to do the 5 key takeaways in the next episode. But for now, the one thing that stood out to me that I think is a really good takeaway is about when Kath was talking about de-risking through strategic planning, because successful businesses evaluate risk carefully before expanding, and Kath highlighted the importance of market research, cost analysis, and then focusing on markets with the highest growth potential to minimize losses and maximize success. And don't forget to pick up the show notes over at thesalesaccelerationformula.com/podcast-show-notes. You'll also find an option to subscribe to our mailing list so that you can get notes for every single episode straight to your inbox. While you're at it, don't forget to tune in to next week's episode of my new 5 in 5 series, where I share 5 actionable takeaways in just 5 minutes from this episode, which will help you supercharge your business growth. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this podcast with your friends, colleagues, and anyone else who might find it valuable. Most importantly, keep the feedback coming so we can keep improving and bringing you more of what you love. Thank you very much for tuning in. And remember, keep listening, keep growing, and keep thriving.